Go as fast as you possibly can for as long as you possibly can. Now that might be a strategy if you are an elite marathon runner, but most athletes know the wisdom of pacing themselves. That's the way a race can be approached sustainably. In particular, training can be approached sustainably. I mean, you may want to really push yourself on that race day, but on your average week of training, if you're doing nothing but going flat out all the time, you are likely to injure yourself or burn out. In the Hebrew Bible, the Sabbath is connected to two things. It is connected to the patterns of creation in which God created in 6 days and then rested on the seventh. If God rests, then God offers us rest as well. The Sabbath is also connected with a story that is in fact older than the creation story, and that is the story of the liberation of the people Israel from slavery. That story was recorded before creation stories were recorded. It's so seminal to who we are as a people of faith. And Sabbath is connected to that by God saying, when giving the law, keep the Sabbath day holy because you were once slaves. The idea here is that when one is a slave, one works whenever the boss, the master, the slave owner wants you to work, and that's very often 7 days a week for long, long days. But when the Israelites became free, they were free to be God's people, free from being taxpayers, freed from being consumers or laborers, freed from being productivity centers, but rather free to simply be people made by God, loved by God, connected to God, known by God. In today's scripture, we view how this law about Sabbath is to be honored, and it teaches us something about all of the law of Torah, and it teaches us about Sabbath as well. Jesus reminds us that the Sabbath was created for us. It was created to help us live according to God's vision, live into God's patterns of creating and resting, live into God's gift of freedom to all of us. And all of Torah law, ironically perhaps, is about liberating us. Now, most of us don't think about law as liberating, but that is what God's laws were given to us for our liberation, our freedom. These laws are a path to freedom because they enable us to live inside boundaries that give us the greatest opportunity to play, to grow, to operate in ways in which we are not constrained by others except for where deference and respect would ask us to be, and in which others are not constrained also. So these freedoms help us to live into God's ideas for us, so that we may enjoy all of God's gifts to us. Law, then, is not about constraint, but about freedom. And how does this apply to the Sabbath in particular? Well, the Sabbath enables us to recognize our freedom by freeing us from all the things around us that would enslave us. Whether that's commerce that wants to take us away from our knowledge of ourselves as free, whether it's the obligations of our work, whether it's all the things in this culture that are trying to capture our attention in order to make money off of us, in order to, in effect, monetize us. Sabbath takes us away from all those things and puts us in a place where the only belonging we have is to ourselves and to God and to those who we love and care for. How do we practice Sabbath? Well, traditionally, Sabbath was practiced by setting aside a whole day in which one was supposed to rest. And you hear the vestiges of this in today's scripture lesson. Rest was intended to be doing no work whatsoever, and some of the Pharisees and rabbis interpreted even healing as a form of work. Now, I don't know if any of you have observant Jews who are friends, but many of them practice a Sabbath observance that pays close attention to what constitutes work. For some, it's even as much as turning on or off a light switch that is considered work. That is one way to approach the Torah, not one that we need to observe, I would argue. But I would say that we have given away so much of Sabbath practice that we forget what a benefit it can be to us spiritually. Last fall, I took 2 days off, and I went to a friend's house so that the obligations of my own house would not be calling to me. And I scheduled my time in hour-long blocks of doing something and then doing nothing. Now, the somethings that I was doing was either reading a book or saying prayers or going for a walk. And the nothing that I did involved either sitting in a chair and watching the world or lying on the floor and just letting my thoughts go here, there, and anywhere, which occasionally did turn into a nap, I'll be honest. That was good too. Those intervals of doing nothing were so impactful for me. I think I will never forget the hour I spent sitting in a red Adirondack chair on Lamplighter Lane, my friend's house, watching the squirrels as they scampered across his front lawn and climbed up and down trees and jumped from one to the other, occasionally seeing a car drive by or somebody walking their dog. That memory is so visceral, and the time simply expanded and expanded and expanded. that form of rest of simply being present to God's creation, is a way in which we can become reconnected to ourselves, reconnected to the gift of time and life, our own breath, reconnected to God. If it is true, as I often say, that beauty is God's most present form of revelation, then simply being and watching and receiving God's beauty is receiving God's presence. So what about Sabbath for us as we move through our lives? Do you think we should take a full day of Sabbath on Sunday as is described in Scripture? I would venture to say moving that direction would be hard for us. I would also ask the question, and I ask it because I don't know it, what does Sabbath look like when you're retired? Well, I might say that this has to do with pacing ourselves and understanding that Sabbath exists in relationship to effort. And what are the efforts with which we ought to be engaged? Well, we ought to be engaged with serving others and serving our community, which can be everything from volunteering in the community, to volunteering at church, to making some muffins for your next door neighbor, to maybe even thinking about using your financial resources to support and serve the community. So we pace ourselves by paying attention to the times that effort ought to be applied as we serve the world, and times that we ought to take rest. And I'm going to make a very, very simple and practical suggestion for us today about how you might experiment with this kind of pacing. I'm going to suggest that you set aside 3 hours this week for serving the community, and then you set aside 3 hours this week for complete rest. That's 6 hours out of all your waking hours. It doesn't seem like much, but I think you will find it is surprising how much effort it takes to do nothing. So those 3 hours, you may want to break them up into some half-an-hour sections at first, just so you get used to what it feels like to sit and do nothing. Last week we heard our scripture as Charlie joined me in preaching about, let us run the race before us. How do we run the race? By pacing ourselves. There is no end to the good that we should be doing, that must be done, that the world needs us to do. And that good is best done when we are well rested and grounded in the God who loves us.